Okay, hello everyone. So this time I'm going to talk about another one of the big plant families. There are a lot of plant families, but this is one that contains a lot of species and especially a lot of edible and medicinal species. And that is the family Brassicaceae, which used to be called crucifery. Brassicaceae means that it is similar to Brassica, Brassica being cabbage, and crucifery means cross-bearing. And the reason that it was called crucifery or cross-bearing is that the flowers have 4 petals arranged at right angles to each other, so in the shape of a cross, basically. And that's something that is consistent with consistent throughout the family, pretty much. That it's something you can, once you learn what a cabbage flower looks like, or a broccoli flower, or a cauliflower flower, or a mustard flower, turnip flower, you can look at them and you can see that that's the plant family that a plant is in. They're pretty recognizable. There are a few other plants that have 4 petals that are not part of this family, like St. Andrew's cross, which is a close relative of St. John's wort. And that's not a related plant, but it has 4 petals, but they look different. They're not, the petals aren't the same shape. So that's a common feature of this plant. And many of the plants in this family are edible. Many of them are also medicinal or spicy, and you can taste the similarity between a lot of them because there are certain chemical pathways in these plants, certain ways of using substances to make phytochemicals that repel insects and other things like that, that are widespread across the family. Certainly not universal to all members of it, but widespread throughout the family and somewhat recognizable by taste and smell. So there's a lot of commonality between them on a nutritional and medicinal level as well. Now, way back, we already talked about mustard as being one of the members of this family, as being a medicinal plant, and about the spiciness of it being sort of a different spiciness from the spiciness of cayenne or the spiciness of ginger, and a different set of spicy compounds. And that it's been used historically as a counter irritant, like used topically to create some irritation on the skin, to take away from the pain of headaches, or to provoke blood flow to the chest, to produce coughing. And also the smell of it is kind of something that is spicy and stimulating to the nose and the sinuses, and can be decongestant when taken internally as well. And so those are fairly common things to see in different degrees throughout this family. I want to talk about probably the best known species in this family, which is more thought of as an edible plant than a medicinal plant, although it has been used as an edible plant. I mean, it has been used as a remedy as well as a vegetable, and that is the species Brassica oleracea. And we don't really have an English name that refers to the whole species of Brassica oleracea. We're mostly familiar with different cultivated varieties of it, which have different names. So cabbage is one variety of it, like head cabbage is a variety of Brassica oleracea. Kale is also the same plant, and so are Brussels sprouts and broccoli and cauliflower. And what's the other one? Rob, and they're all different, or kohlrabi, they're all different varieties of essentially the same thing. They're some of them are grown for the leaves, some of them are grown for the buds, some are the leaf buds, like Brussels sprouts. Some of them are grown for the flower buds, like broccoli and cauliflower, and some are grown for different varieties of the leaves, like kale or cabbage. But they're all different varieties of the same plant, different varieties of the same species. So it's kind of like the dog of the plant world. You know how with dogs you've got bulldogs and chihuahuas, and you've got sled dogs, and you've got Dalmatians and German shepherds, and they all look really different, right? We have this common word dog that we can use to refer to all of them, and of course they're all the same species. With plants, with these Brassica oleracea, we don't have a common name in English that refers to all of them, at least not one that I can think of. But but they're all the same species, and it has a wide variety of different forms. And there's kind of the landrace form, or the basic uncultivated form of it, which is just sort of one plant called wild mustard, but there are others that would have the same name. So there are a lot of different varieties of it, and of course mostly we know of them as vegetables. But cabbage, especially a bruised poultice of cabbage leaf, has been used for a variety of different things as an anti-inflammatory, as a discutiant, which is something to make swelling or bruising go away. So it's been used and to help circulation in local areas. So taking a cabbage leaf and crushing it to the point where it's starting to leak its juices, we call that bruising, and then putting that on, which also makes it soft and wilty, and putting that over bee stings or engorged breasts or bruises or something like that, has been used as a remedy for different types of swelling and fluid retention and things like that in different places. And that's a pretty common home remedy in places where cabbage is grown and where it's a big part of the diet as well. So the leaves in these plants tend to contain some sulfur compounds that have a variety of levels of strength to them as far as flavor goes. Let's see. There are a few different classes of these sulfur compounds that are found in broccoli, that kind of give broccoli its distinctive taste that a lot of small children don't like. Although, you know, I don't know how much of that is a stereotype versus reality. Neither of my kids, and as far as I can remember, none of my siblings had any problem eating broccoli and Brussels sprouts any more than anything else. But it's kind of something that is portrayed as being a thing that kids don't like, and it does have a strong taste to it. One of the substances that gives it that taste is, well, there's a class of substances called indoles, and one of those that's received a lot of research is called diindole methionine, which is it's a sulfur compound that might help the body to get rid of irregular cells. It's kind of been promoted somewhat as a remedy for cancers, or preventative for cancers, which is maybe exaggerating things a bit, but it does help to prevent irregular cells from developing and growing in the body, at least to some extent. And it also has anti-inflammatory properties, and many of these sulfur compounds do have anti-inflammatory and bacteriostatic properties. And by bacteriostatic, I mean that applying them topically will keep bacteria from being able to grow and multiply. So it's not necessarily something that you would take. It wouldn't necessarily be your first choice to take internally to kill off a bacterial infection, but it would maybe help to, wash out a wound or something like that. So that class of substances is in a lot of these plants. Another thing that is in a lot of them are a different group of sulfur compounds called isothiocyanates, which contain a sulfur section and a nitrogen section, and are, kind of larger organic molecules. And these are volatile compounds. So they're kind of the pungent, sharp smell that is in some, there's some of them in onions, and there's some of them in mustards as well, particularly Sinapis, which is the mustard genus that produces kind of the mustard seeds that people usually make mustard out of. So sometimes people call this whole family the mustard family. But there's also the mustard genus. So it's like a pungent sulfury compound that provokes production of, it irritates the mucous membranes. And so it provokes production of tears, flowing of mucus, that sort of thing. And so if you're eating something with hot mustard and it makes your nose run, that's kind of why it's doing that, is that these sulfur compounds are provoking the goblet cells to produce more liquid. And so that can be helpful if somebody's congested, especially if somebody has long-standing congestion that's really sort of dry, where they had a bunch of mucus, but now it's just kind of dried and thick inside their sinuses and they can't breathe through their nose. It can help with that. It has been used to break up congestion in the chest and to open up the airways. But I don't really like it for that because it's kind of harsh, and there are other things that work pretty well without being as harsh. I use it okay as a topical, in the form of like mustard oil on the chest or mustard plaster or something like that. But as far as, people used to snort mustard powder for breathing difficulties and things like that. And I think that's too, it's dramatic and it's harsh, and sometimes it works really quickly and gets big, good results. And sometimes it's just irritating and doesn't help and maybe makes things worse. And I really try to avoid situations that are going to make things worse for people, because, they don't like it when you make them feel worse when they come to you for help. So it's something that I try to pretty strictly avoid. More dramatic remedies when less dramatic remedies can get the job done. Just a second. So horseradish is another member of this family that is used medicinally, has a lot of the similar properties to what I just described: spicy, blood moving, decongestant, counter irritant. There's another plant that is kind of similar to it that's growing in the woods right now, that's actually maybe in bloom right now, called toothwort, cut leaf toothwort. And this is one of the earliest blooming spring plants that is common in central Kentucky and in eastern Kentucky. It will often grow on hillsides, creek banks, things like that, and it has a root whose flavor is very similar to horseradish, a little bit milder than most horseradish that's available commercially. And if you chew it when you have tooth pain, it sort of makes the spiciness of it, takes away the intensity of the tooth pain. Of course, that's really just a workaround, and in this day and age, there are interventions that can be done for tooth pains that are physical, like, you know, getting a cavity filled or something like that. But as far as a short-term possible thing to do about it, that's a traditional use for this plant. I don't really use it very much for that. I don't have people come to me with tooth pain very often, except when I'm doing first aid. At festivals and things like that, where people are going to be for a few days, and you know, maybe if they have tooth pain, they'll come to me rather than leaving the festival and go to a dentist or something like that. And in that case, I use either usnea oil or a sweet birch oil infusion, which are both pain relieving. And the sweet birch has a very nice sweet flavor to it. The usnea oil just kind of tastes mossy, but it works better than anything else that I've found for dental pain. But a lot of traditional remedies for dental pain are spicy things like cloves and like this cutleaf toothwort, or like prickly ash, which I've talked about before as well. That sort of provoke the soft tissue of the mouth as a way of drawing away from the pain of the harder tissue of the tooth. So anyway, that's a plant that you might find if you were to go out in the woods right now. And that's you know, something that is good to, I think it's good to go out and find it if you can, because it's nice to make that connection to the place, to the land, and you know, see the early spring flowers blooming, see the plant world starting to change what it's doing and transition into a different phase of the year.
What does toothwort look like?
Let me see if I can find a picture of it real quick. Yeah, that's no. So just a second.
I just found one there, Andrew.
Yeah, here it looks like this. And as you can see, it's got 4 petals that are kind of at right angles from each other, and it's got a toothed compound leaf. And then it has a small spindly white root, which is right below the surface and usually comes out very easily. And it's pretty much the only thing that looks like that in the woods right now. You'll see the leaves before you see the flowers. I mean, if you're going to the same place looking as it's coming up and stuff, the leaves will be visible and conspicuous before the flowers are. It's kind of one of the only green plants going. Sorry. Sharing. Okay, it's one of the only green plants that's on the forest floor right now.
It's
So
pretty.
it's pretty noticeable. Yeah, it's pretty. It has a less showy sister called Cardamine tinctoria, which is kind of in everybody's backyard and has similar compounds in the leaf, but doesn't have as much of a root to it. And that's called wintercress, among other names. But you can find that probably growing in a lot of areas of disturbed ground right now, and it too will be flowering soon. But it's nowhere near as showy, nowhere near as noticeable. It's a like tiny little thing, and often the whole plant's the size of a quarter, or sometimes it's closer to the size of silver dollar or something like that, but very small. And these are in kind of, they're in a sort of people call them cresses, and a cress is not a specific biological group. It's not like a subfamily necessarily. It's more like a type of vegetable, but they're small leafy plants that are a little bit spicy, that are in the mustard family, that you can eat, that you would tend to eat raw. So watercress is the most well-known commercially cultivated one. You can find watercress leaves all year around in Kentucky. They grow in water, they grow in moving water. Sometimes they grow right on the edge or right next to water. But you'll often find it in springs, which maintain usually a lot of the time springs don't freeze even when the ground freezes, because they're coming from underground where it's warmer. And so you'll often find it growing in springs. Sometimes you'll find it growing in streams as well. And you shouldn't really eat it out of anywhere that you wouldn't drink the water from. It flowers later in the year, but like I said, you can find the leaves all year round. It tolerates freezing pretty well because the spicy stuff in it keeps it from freezing. And it will warm people's bodies up too, to eat it. Just kind of really what it's doing is that the sulfur compounds are vasodilating. They open up the blood vessels, which allows warm blood to flow to your fingers and toes and things like that. So, it makes you feel warmer. And watercress was brought here as a vegetable. It was native to Europe and Asia, and people brought it here to grow it and eat it because it was a popular type of green type of salad green, or leafy vegetable that people would eat raw back in time that people were first coming over here from Europe. Iceberg lettuce hadn't been developed yet. Most lettuces weren't really available in the summertime because they turned bitter. So it was a very popular fresh green herb for people to eat. And so people planted it, especially in springs, but also in other water courses. And then it fell out of popularity at some point, and it's just kind of kept growing itself ever since. It's a sort of self-perpetuating crop food permaculture type of thing. It's not a native plant. It's not really a weed either. I mean, except in very limited circumstances. It doesn't overgrow and take over other things, but it does keep growing unless it's purposely eradicated from an area. It will often keep growing, for generations and centuries and things like that. So it's not at all weird to find it growing out in a spring out in the woods, where it may have at one point been planted, or it may have been somehow brought there by animals or something. But it doesn't really have a very clear-cut way of getting itself around other than the seeds washing downstream. But it's present in a lot of springs. Not just the seeds, the parts of the plant can wash downstream too and take root elsewhere. It can propagate vegetatively. But watercress was used not only for its spiciness and its blood-moving properties like the other mustards, but also it was a really good source of vitamin C, precisely because it was a fresh green plant that you could get all winter long. when people were often living off of, non-fresh foods, things like salted meat and crackers or whatever, or just storable dry foods like grains or preserved meat. This is what a lot of people would be eating in the wintertime in the days before motorized transport of food and refrigeration. So it was kind of thought of as being an herb to ward off scurvy, because that was, something that people could really easily get back in those days, because of that dietary situation. And just in general, something, nutritious and green that people could eat in the wintertime. And so it's a good food. It's a good crop to grow if you have the right situation for it. I've tried growing it in my pond, but the fish eat it. They love it. So I don't usually get very much of it if I'm trying to grow it there. It
Would
also
it grow
grows in.
somewhere like that has like a spring underground where like, I mean, it's not like so much soaking wet, but the water is under there, so the ground is soft. Would it grow somewhere like that?
It might. It grows in creeks all over Lexington, which I would never, eat it out of a creek in Lexington, because I would, for the same reason that I would never drink the water out of a creek in Lexington. But it will often grow like on damp, mossy rocks, and it'll grow right in the moss. Or sometimes it will grow down in the water, especially when the water is not too rushy and not moving too much, because it will get washed away and end up growing wherever it washes up. So, I don't know if it would grow completely solid ground, but it will definitely grow like in the splash zone of bubbling water, or on parts of creek banks that might get flooded after a rain, but not be wet or not be underwater most of the time. When I was in Central Asia, there were large fields on the Amu Darya, the Amu River, which people were irrigating, flooding the fields with the irrigation from the river, and growing watercress out in the desert in fields that they had built and then flooded, which is not necessarily a very efficient use of water, and wasn't necessarily a very good thing for their neighbors downstream, because a lot of the water didn't end up making it downstream anymore. But it was a popular enough vegetable in that time and place that apparently there was that demand for there to be that kind of commercial cultivation of it. Just a second. Okay, I see that Jennifer has shared a couple of this top plant is the toothwort. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm going to type out the name of Brassica. Oh, I meant to send that to everyone. Sorry. All right. So let's see. So yeah, besides Brassica oleracea, which is like I said, has many different forms. There's multiple other Brassica species that are commercially cultivated, like turnips, that are, a staple crop in some places. Turnips were probably the main root vegetable for, or one of the main root vegetables for a lot of Europe for a long time. There's also in this family, there's the genus Lepidium, and there are a few different species of Lepidium. One of them that is kind of popular in recent years is called maca root. And that's something that grows at high altitudes in South America. And it is closely related to a local plant. But well, hang on a second. Yeah, so the Lepidium mayeni is the South American variety. Lepidium virginiana grows around here. There's also a Lepidium that's native to Europe that has been used medicinally. And all of them, their roots have some history of use as being sort of an energizing or strengthening tonic. But the one in South America, it has perhaps more of a reputation for that sort of thing, and is maybe just because it's exotic, or maybe because it really is better at that sort of thing, has become popular in recent years as sort of something like ginseng that people think of as an energy tonic and something that enhances libido and that sort of thing. And so it's a popular supplement that you could probably go into a lot of health food stores and find. I think that the scarcity of it has as much to do with its popularity as anything, because it's harder for a company to sell you something common than something scarce, especially if they have a particular line on it where they're able to get it when everybody else can't, like something that's growing in another continent or whatever. I always think about that sort of thing when I'm thinking about why things are popular or what's popular. But it's not to say that it doesn't do what people think it does either. Yeah. So another thing that is noteworthy about this family of plants is almost all of them have the same type of seed, which is a very small round ball, spherical, tiny seed, and some of them can grow into fairly large plants. So that's kind of where the parable of the mustard seed comes from. That's mentioned in the New Testament. It's the idea that it's a tiny seed, but it grows into a good sized plant that birds can perch on and that sort of thing. And it depends, not all mustard family plants are large, but some of them are. So yeah, there are a lot of vegetables and a lot of medicinal plants that are members of this family, and most of them have the same sort of constituency as far as the same properties, energetics, you might say, of being pungent, spicy, a little bit bitter, provoking movement of the blood and of tears and mucus as well. So being expectorant, it's a kind of a common theme that flows throughout all these plants, and the way that the plants utilize sulfur. So pretty much all plants, I would say all plants, contain sulfur. It's just a common element that's in the soil. Plants accumulate it, they use it for different purposes. And plants in the mustard family make some compounds out of it that are pretty unique to the mustard family and that have medicinal properties. So they're sort of working with common substances, common elements from the environment, and making them into uncommon medicinal compounds. And the purpose that serves in the plants is probably that it discourages predation from other animals, from insects and maybe herbivores, by being spicy and by being irritating. There are still plenty of things that eat them, including, people, and animals will eat them if that's what you give them. But maybe, and some bugs will eat them, but a lot of bugs don't. Cabbage moths do, but a lot of bugs will leave them alone. So that's one interesting thing about the plant family. And the other thing is that they tend to be pretty prolific as compared to, say an orchid. If you grow orchids, you're usually not going to get a whole bunch of orchids, or if you are, it's going to take you a long time. With most plants in the mustard family, you can grow a large amount of them pretty quickly, or on a small amount of ground, or in the case of watercress, a small amount of water. But you can grow a lot of vegetable in a small amount of space fairly quickly with the plants in this family. And that's part of the reason why they've been very popular as vegetables and as crops for people to grow, which people have used both, medicinally and culinarily. So in addition to the sulfur compounds, these plants also elaborate their own types of starches. They tend to be even the leaves tend to have some starches in them. And some of them have starchy roots like turnips have. And so a lot of them contain oligosaccharides that are not super, they don't get converted into glucose easily in your own body, but they do get turned into substrates for gut bacteria to grow on. So for the most part, these plants are pretty nourishing to the gut bacteria. A lot of them cause gas in some people for the same reason. But they can be really good plants to have in your diet to keep regularity, because they contain fiber and because they also contain these starches. And that can help with bowel functioning and regularity, as we know, but it can also help a lot with things that might not be as obvious, like the production of neurotransmitters. About half of the neurotransmitters that your body uses are used around the digestive system. So if the gut bacteria there are working properly, then a lot of the time that's going to make the nervous system work better. It's going to make the nutrition of the whole body work better if there are good bacteria. And plants in the mustard family, including kale, which is kind of, in recent years has been thought of as more of a health food. They can help to promote that kind of regrowth of bacteria, if they're, or recreating a good population of gut bacteria. In the culture that I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, kale was sort of a comfort food, like macaroni and cheese. It was something you'd make as a side dish for fried chicken or fish or whatever. I mean, people ate it at every meal, ate it with grits, or ate it with meat or fish or poultry or whatever. So it's a very common thing for people to grow, because it's easy to grow a lot of, and because you can harvest it the entire time of year that it's not super cold out. And so it's been, kind of a popular culinary herb where I grew up. People cook it and put oil on it and things like that. But in recent years here in the city, a lot of people think of it as, kind of a new health food or something like that. And I think that's kind of, to me, that's pretty strange. But it's good food. It's decent food for you. contains a lot of vitamins and minerals, as most dark green leafy vegetables do. Also contains good plant proteins and some of these mustard family compounds that are anti-inflammatory and that help prevent mutations or irregular cells and things like that. All right. So yeah, I guess that's mainly what I wanted to say about that plant family. There are a lot of different members of the family, Brassicaceae. Many of them are grown as medicine. Many of them are grown as vegetables, as food, and I feel like more so than other plant families, they have a kind of common thread running through their medicinal properties for the most part. There are some exceptions, and one of those that I'd like to talk about is one of the medicinal herbs that I wanted to talk about today, and that is woad or Isatis. Isatis tinctoria is a member of this plant family, and it has green leaves and yellow flowers, but the above ground parts of it have been traditionally used to make a blue dye. And that blue dye has been used in cloth, may have been used in ancient times for tattoos or body paint. Was one of the main sources of blue dye before indigo became popular. Yeah, I'm going to write that out. Isatis is Isatis. Hang on a second. How do I do this? Yeah, here we go. Tinctoria means tinted or tinting, really, something that is used for dyeing fabric, especially. But the root of woad, so woad topically has been used kind of similarly to other mustard family plants. The root of it has been used to stimulate immunity. And it is kind of something that's a fairly low dose herb. It's not a super low dose herb like foxglove or anything like that, but it is something that would be used in, maybe 1 milliliter at a time instead of more than that, smallish doses. And it's very stimulating to the immune system. It's a very good thing if someone has the very beginnings, if someone is noticing that they're at the very beginning of an illness, like if they've been exposed to an illness and then they start just kind of feeling that irritated feeling in their sinuses, for instance. Sometimes at that point, Isatis can turn things around and keep people from getting sick, or so it seems. And that's a traditional use for it. The way that it's described in Chinese medicine is to say that it strengthens the exterior, which is kind of an arcane concept or kind of an esoteric way of describing it, but essentially it's like it's strengthening your body's defenses against the outside world, or the division of your body away from the outside world in such a way that it's keeping external malicious forces from getting inside your body and causing it harm. Hang on just a moment, I'll be right back. All right. So with Isatis, I use it fairly infrequently. It's something that I consider to be helpful in people whose immune system is not naturally very strong, and something that is kind of, it can make people feel sort of like a flu-like type of feeling as it's working through their body. So sometimes that's really, what they would feel if the sickness just came on anyway, but it often just kind of is short-lived, and then they're back to normal more quickly than they would have been if they'd really gotten sick. So it's something I use occasionally, but it is kind of, to me, it feels like a very ancestral remedy, something that I know that my family used to use more often, and that was also something that, they dyed their clothing with and stuff like that. That was, maybe a common thing for people to grow in gardens, or else kind of sow out in the meadows and let it grow wild, because it is in its chosen habitat, which is like Northern Europe and kind of not very far Northern Asia, but higher altitudes, like 40 to 50 degrees or so latitude. It'll grow wild, and it will be very prolific. So can get meadows and fields full of the stuff. It's kind of, woad is probably actually an old English pronunciation of the same word that we now pronounce weed. Nowadays, if you just say weed without otherwise specifying, it refers to a different medicinal plant. But back in Beowulf's time, this was the weed, I guess. So that's what people called it. And so it's it's a plant that I like having around. I grow it, I cultivate some of it, a small amount of it, like a 1 foot by 1 foot section or so. dying with it is kind of more trouble to me than it's really strictly worth. But I have done it before, and it does produces a deep blue, and if you mix it with yellow, it produces a very nice green, a very good green color. So if you do marigold and woad, that makes a very nice green color. Weld, which is another dye plant, used to be mixed with woad to make a color called Lincoln green, which was popular clothing color that was made in Lincolnshire in England. And that's sort of what Robin Hood's color of green was supposed to have been, was the mixture of woad and weld to make that particular green color, sort of a pool table green, I guess you could say. But and that was a popular color for people like Robin Hood, who were hunters and who lived in the woods and things like that, because it blends right in with the foliage in the summertime. Even though it's not like modern camouflage fabrics where there's lots of different variations in the color, it's just pretty much a solid color, but it blends in pretty well. And so that was a popular fabric color or popular fabric dye for many centuries, and now is still done on something of an artisanal basis, not really like on an industrial scale anymore, as far as I'm aware of. So that's it's a good plant that is a little different in terms of what we use it for than other plants in the mustard family. It's not especially spicy. You could do something kind of similar with horseradish and sort of shock the system at the early onset of an illness. And I have done that before, especially in people that are very prone to congestion, because you can actually use horseradish and other mustardy spices as decongestants proactively. So they can help keep congestion from building up in the first place. And in some people, it's important to do that because some people just have really reactive upper airways that produce a lot of phlegm and a lot of congestion, especially maybe during spring allergy season and things like that. And so sometimes we use spicy mustard-based compounds like horseradish for that. I don't think that I have moved my jar of horseradish roots into the clinic yet, but it's kind of, for some reason, it is people look at that jar of horseradish and think, what in the world is that? And even here, let me see if I can find this this picture. This picture was taken of me by a publication called Vox, who did a story that featured my practice last year.
That was a great story. I read it.
Yeah, so that's me with my jar of horseradish root, and everybody that sees it thought that it was really strange looking. I had people ask me, "Is that a lizard or something like that?" Like, I'm just gonna have a tincture of lizard on the shelf or something.
You should, though.
Someone might do, but I'm not going to. But yeah, that was I've had so many people ask, "What is in that jar?" And I don't exactly know what's so striking looking about it, but people certainly seem to find it that way. But yeah, horseradish is good for that. Wasabi is another thing that does the same sort of thing. It's just kind of very It kind of twists your nose, has a very, very pungent, spicy flavor to it. Watercress has a much milder version of that same effect. And so does white mustard and lots of other mustards that are out there. But anyway, that's about what I have to say about the mustard family as far as a general overview of that plant family. It's a really good plant family to get acquainted with. Once you learn to recognize what the flowers look like, you'll see them on a lot of plants. There are a lot of them out there in gardens and in the wild as well. And especially right now, if you go out, you can see things like mouse ear cress and hairy bittercress and wintercress, where there are a lot of early spring blooming plants that are members of this family with either white or yellow flowers, occasionally pinkish white with some pink on them. But early spring is a good time to look for plants in the mustard family because a lot of them will grow over winter and then bloom when spring comes. And even some of the vegetable ones like kale will do that sometimes. A lot of the time in this environment here in Kentucky, kale will die to the ground over winter, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it survives the winter and then blooms and goes to seed in the spring if you let it. But anyway, that's a big plant family, has thousands of species in it, but it has some commonalities that tend to run through it. Yeah, so we talked about mustard seed originally back in the 14th class that we did. I think that was the only other mustard family plant we talked about so far. Yeah, also, for anybody that didn't see it on Instagram, I just posted on YouTube a couple days ago a compilation of a couple different descriptions of different evergreens, conifers that are growing around here. Different pine and spruce and red cedar and yew and cypress. So just kind of like a short video, a couple minutes long video talking about these different plants that are common in as landscaping trees around here. Some of them are also wild, hemlock as well, but looking at the leaves and the cones of all those different plants. And you know, I feel like that's a good wintertime botanical activity, a good wintertime activity to strengthen your connection to the land and to the plant world, is to learn the conifers that stay green throughout the winter. Well, most of them stay green throughout the winter. The Taxodium, the cypress tree does not. It's our only local tree that is a conifer that loses its leaves in winter. But that's a short video that everybody should check out if you haven't already seen them. I was sharing like one or two species at a time on Instagram, and then I put them all together on my YouTube, not on the Hedge School YouTube, but on Clinical Herbalist, my original YouTube channel. And yeah, I'll be doing some more videos as the spring progresses about how to strengthen connections with the plants that are around us, and how to, you know, get to know them and getting to know the seasons, things like that. Because it's been kind of the dark of the year for plants for a while now, but it's really starting to emerge into it's going to be a trickle and then a flood of plants coming into flower and things like that. So now that I've got my new clinic built, I will be trying to produce more content about that sort of thing as the season changes.
I found I don't know what it is, but it's a very, very it's like a pale purple on the middle flower, but then it kind of gets darker as it comes out, and it's very low to the ground. They're really teeny tiny. Like, I mean, I almost wouldn't have seen it except for I saw like a nut or something on the ground, and then I was like, oh, there's purple flowers, and it was just on a trail, and I'm not sure what they were, and I didn't have my phone because I try not to carry my phone with me everywhere I go. And so I didn't have a picture of them, but they were really pretty. But it was the first flower I've seen in a while.
Yeah, let me see. Hang on a second. I'm going to send a picture and see if this looks like what they were. Does it look like that maybe? These are starting to bloom right now. Yeah, bird's eye speedwell, also known as Brassica.
Maybe.
There.
Maybe. I'll go down the hill tomorrow and I'll see if I can find a photo, take a
Yeah.
photo of them and send them to you. But they were just the
Yeah.
tiniest
Yeah,
little flowers. And I was like, oh
Yeah,
my
these
goodness.
things are super tiny, and they're blooming right now, and they're kind of you know, a bluish purplish color rather than a violet color rather than a magenta type of color.
Yeah, they're pretty, whatever they are.
Yeah, this is that one is bird's eye speedwell, also known as Veronica, and Veronica was my grandmother's name. She was named after a different species of Veronica, but her family were traveling medicine people when she was really little. But yeah. Anyway, that's a plant that's starting to come into flower right now. Dead nettle never really completely stops flowering. Henbit and red dead nettle are both you can find the occasional flower of them right now. And I've actually seen a couple of dandelions already. So dandelions are starting to open up again. And you know, dandelions, like plants in general, they start out as a trickle and then there's a flood of them. So right now it's just kind of the very beginning of that trickle here in our environment. And you know, in a couple months there will be golden fields of dandelion, but right now it's just kind of like you can find the occasional one sometimes.
Those little white bell looking flowers, I forget what they're called, but those are blooming here. I have a few little patches of that.
Spring beauty or
Well, no, it's kind of a weird name. I looked it up once before. I guess I should have been prepared before I mentioned them, but they're like this pretty little white flower, and they just kind of hang down like little white bells.
maybe
Like,
harbingers of spring.
maybe they shoot straight up, and then once it gets to the tip, the petals, the whole little flower head just kind of dangles down
No.
like a little bell.
Yeah, interesting. So the other plant that I wanted to talk about today, as far as talking about specific herbs, is bee balm. We've seen bee balm on our herb walks some. It's a really nice medicinal plant. It's not too intense, but it's very versatile. And my indications for it, or the things I would say that it's good for moving the blood. It's good for decongesting, and it's good for any sort of little airways, ear, nose, and throat type stuff. So it's good for congestion. It's good for the lungs. It's sort of like, it's got thymol in it, which is also in the plant thyme, but it's kind of a milder thing than thyme. It's also got carvacrol and eugenol, which are in oregano and basil. But it's got them in milder amounts of those also. And it's good for a lot of things like that. It's good for a lot of respiratory stuff. So I've been using it as when I have people that I'm trying to not get pneumonia, when they have a respiratory illness, I usually use thyme. But in more frail people, a lot of the time I'll use bee balm instead. And also in children, thyme is sometimes too intense for them to take, too strong tasting. So a lot of the time bee balm instead works, and it tastes a little more minty. It's also got some well, I'm not sure what the substance is. It's not menthol, but it's got some other minty volatile compounds in it that come out through the breath. It actually gets into your bloodstream and then gets metabolized through the lining of your lungs, so that you actually have these substances coming out through the secretions of the lung and killing off any bacteria that are in there, and soothing and cooling the lungs and decongesting the lower airways. So it's a really useful plant for that sort of thing. Topically, a wash for it can also help to heal deep wounds, rinsing out. Sometimes what I would do with this is make a tea out of it, put it in a bulb syringe, and then squirt it into a deeper wound to wash it out. And I've used that on a variety of different things, like puncture wounds, basically. Also, you have used it on wounds from glass from automobile accidents, because it will help to keep the wound channel from getting infected, and it will help it to heal up, but it won't cause it to heal over the glass as much. That will still happen even without any kind of treatment. But yarrow is something I would often use in that situation, but for wounds. But I think bee balm is better about letting it stay open just a little bit longer and giving any kind of inclusions like bits of broken glass more of a chance to work their way out. Sorry if that's kind of gnarly to talk about, but it's something that happens a lot with people who have been in automobile accidents, is that they'll have, bits of glass inside wounds, and it doesn't really make any sense to try and remove them surgically or anything, but sometimes they can irritate people. And sometimes, you'll get a wound that'll heal over and then suppurate where you have infection, and it comes to the surface and breaks open, and that's a mess. So this kind of helps to keep that from happening by, washing the wounds with it in the first place. Again, sorry for what might be a sort of graphic topic, but sometimes that's part of taking care of people. So I really like bee balm for those purposes. And it's also really good for bees. They love it. They flock to it. They drink the nectar out of it, which also contains thymol, which might help keep them from getting certain types of mites and parasites and things. So that is something that's you know, a useful thing for. It's an example of non-humans using herbal medicine, and you know, the sort of thing that I like to point to as to the idea that the practice of herbal medicine actually maybe goes back further than humanity itself, seemingly. And you know, bees, going to bee balm is part of that, and they go to other plants in the mint family that have similar substances in them. But bee balm has a lot of nectar. It has a long tube-like flower that has a fair bit of nectar in it. If you pick the tube off, you can drink the nectar out of it yourself too. But which was, you know, something I would often do. It's in flowers at the same time that blackberry bushes have fruit on them, and they grow in the same fields. So I would often eat the flowers or suck the nectar out of the flowers while picking blackberries when I was a kid, because blackberries were a huge part of our they were like our treat. You know, we would go gather a couple 5-gallon buckets of blackberries, freeze them in Ziploc bags, and we would eat those as sort of a sweet frozen treat, you know, for much of the year until we ran out of them. We always ran out well before the next season came around. But anyway, it grows alongside the blackberries, grows in the same types of tall meadows, getting overgrown and starting to trend towards forest. And of course, when we were on our walk in Garrett County, we saw it growing under power lines where they cut through the forest. And you know, that strip of land is being kept from turning back into forest because they don't want trees to grow near the power lines. So they're you know, maintaining it as a meadow by mowing it maybe every couple years or so. And that's the sort of, you know, something that hasn't been pastured lately, but hasn't been you know, cut to the ground or pastured lately, and has had some time to get overgrown, is the sort of habitat that it likes. And blackberry time, which is like late June to early August, is often when you'll find it most prolifically in bloom around here. And the whole above ground part is useful. I usually pluck everything off the stem. The stem is pretty woody, but the flower head and the leaves are all medicinal, and fairly equally medicinal in terms of what's in them. And yeah, I like it for helping non-healing wounds to heal, and for decongesting and opening and cooling and soothing the upper air. Well, not just the upper airways, the airways in general. In people with reactive airways, people that get hay fever, things like that, it can make that better. And during the course of these last couple of years, when there's been a lot of respiratory illness, a lot more than usual, I've used a lot of it, more than usual of it.
Would it be safe for someone to take as like sort of a preventative during high respiratory illness time, as like a prevention?
Yeah, do that. Yeah.
I have
Like,
a niece who gets like upper respiratory congestion, like she's sick right now, and she just, you know, it's like she'll get done with something and she, like a month later, she'll get something else back. So I'm trying to come up with something for her to just like stick in her mouth, you know, on a regular basis.
Yeah. It's definitely something that can be used that way. And, you know, unlike say horseradish or something, it's not nearly so intense flavor wise. It's pretty agreeable. It's like more like somewhere between oregano and peppermint, I would say, as far as how it tastes. But the nice thing about it is it has a really wide range of coverage against potential bacterial infections. So it keeps people from developing secondary bacterial infections if they're having something like hay fever or a respiratory virus. And, for people who have reactive airways that are reactive predictably, like if somebody, has breathing trouble and congestion every time the oak trees are in bloom or every time ragweed's in bloom, you can give it to them for that part of the year. And that usually helps quite a bit.
So it could be useful for like people who get allergy stuff that eventually turns into a sinus infection because they can never clear everything.
Exactly. It's really
Okay.
helpful in that type of situation. Second.
Trying to come up with something for a teen to take is very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be really challenging to get somebody to take flavors that they're not used to unless they're already motivated to do something on their own. If it's their idea that they want to try and take some sort of remedy, it's a lot easier. But if you're trying to talk them into it and the flavors are unfamiliar to them, it can be pretty challenging.
Yeah, well, she has the right intention. Like she wants to like it, but she's just her palate is just not developed to like it because she's been raised on like fast food and she wants to get out of that. And so she's trying, but it's almost like, being addicted to a drug when you're raised that way. It really
Sure.
is hard to like wean from that lifestyle.
Yeah, I've seen that is really hard for a lot of people. I guess I'm lucky that I grew up in a place where there was no fast food. It's something we
That's
might
a
get
blessing.
occasionally if we came to Lexington, but there just wasn't any in Lee County when I was a kid. There's a Dairy Queen now, but that didn't come along till later. But yeah, it's a pretty palatable thing. It's a pretty agreeable thing. It's not something that most people would find super intense or disagreeable. Everybody's a little bit different, but it's not real bitter or medicinal tasting. It's more, kind of on the minty and aromatic side of things. So next week we're going to be talking about the mint family and the patterns and constituents in that whole family, which is another one of the major plant families. And there are lots of plant families, but it's another one that contains a lot of plants that we use medicinally. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this coming month. I want to do another herb walk in March. Right now I'm looking at March 25th, which is a Saturday, as the date for that. March 25th, yes, Saturday, March 25th. And probably closer to that time, I'm going to go out in the woods and in the fields and look and see where things are going to be more interesting for us to look at. But I'm thinking we might go to the woods again and see how things are in that area and look at some of what's coming up in the springtime woods, fairly early-ish spring. Also, I'd like to mention that right now, this week, is the traditional time for harvesting sassafras. So this is when plants are starting to send the sap upwards into the above ground parts of plants, not just sassafras, the maple and other plants too. The sap is running right now. Plants are wicking liquid up from underground. It's taking nutrients from the roots with it, going up into the bark, going up into the leaves, or what will become the leaves, the buds, and eventually forming the leaves and making them grow. So right now, this third week of February, basically, starting today, it's not really that specific, but right around this part of February is, Valentine's Day is kind of traditionally looked at as being the start date, is when the sap starts running in sassafras. And at this, if you went in the middle of January and you try to take the bark off of sassafras, it doesn't come off easily. It's like it's firmly attached to the wood underneath. You can cut it off with a knife, but it's a slow, painstaking process. If you go to sassafras now, to a small sassafras tree, if you make a little nick in the bark to get it started, you can peel it right off with your hands, almost like peeling a banana or something. It'll just peel right off of the plant. So usually what I would do is cut off a branch and then peel that branch and use that bark. And it's very aromatic right now, and it's very easy to harvest. So in traditional Eastern Kentucky medicine, right now, this is when people would go out and harvest it, and then they would start taking it as a spring tonic. It tends to move the lymph. It tends to it elevates the mood. It makes people happier. Some people notice that it makes a big difference in their sex drive, increases it. Some people don't have that effect from it. But for most people, it increases their circulation, elevates their mood, possibly makes their liver function a little more vigorously. So it's thought of in the traditional medicine here as being a spring tonic and as being something that purifies the blood. And the idea of purifying the blood is basically that it's helping the liver to work and, helping to, the liver and the kidneys really to remove waste products from the blood that may have accumulated, especially over the course of a winter of, eating non-fresh food, as would have usually been the case in former times and often still is now. So this is, it's not the easiest time of year to identify sassafras. So if you go out into the woods and you're looking for it, unless you really know what you're looking for, it might be hard to recognize. Of course, once you find it and you smell it, you know that that's what it is, because it's quite a distinctive smell. But it might be something that if someone were going to harvest sassafras, that they would find it during the part of the year when it had leaves on it, and then mark its location or note its location, and then go back at this time of the year and harvest either take some branches and harvest the bark from them, or take some small trees and harvest the bark from those if there are several trees. And so that's a traditional Appalachian spring tonic, used here for many generations and still pretty widely practiced now. And also just kind of a cultural beverage here. I have often gone out and harvested sassafras at this time of year, but I have not done it at all in the last few years. But it's a really good plant to have around. It's kind of like cinnamon, kind of mucilaginous, and very moving. It moves the fluids in the body, very kinetic. So that is something that is specific to this point in the cycle of the year in this environment. And it might be a little bit different in other places where sassafras grows, but it has a lot to do with the photo period. So it's not really dependent on temperature as much as it is on the actual time of the year and the length of the day. Yeah, let's see. Okay, so the 25th, as I mentioned, is when I want to have the herb walk. And then the previous Saturday, the 18th, March 18th, I'm going to be doing an open house here at the clinic, where I'm just going to have some, some refreshments and just kind of be here all day, show the place to the people and everything like that. If anybody would like to come visit, that would be, a pretty good time too. If you just want to come and see the place, then March 18th, that day I'll be here and be dedicated to showing it to people. I might have some small workshops happening or something like that during different parts of the day. I haven't completely planned that part out, but I should have the whole place all moved in and decorated and everything like that by that point. So I'm looking forward to that, and then after that, I'm going to have some free classes on different topics, like using herbs with children, for instance, with children and adolescents. That's one class that I know that I'm going to do. I'm going to have just a series of just probably hour-long, fairly short classes that are open to the public and free. And any of you who wanted to attend any of those would certainly be welcome to as well. And also tell your friends. But I will have specific dates and topics for those probably by the next time I talk to you. All right. So any questions about woad or about bee balm?
I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you for sharing your knowledge with the world.
I try. So I have this one question here that says, with toothwort for dental pain, would someone chew the fresh or dry root? Probably chew the fresh root, or if you were going to work with the dry root, you would probably want to rehydrate it so that you're not trying to chew something very hard tough on a tooth that's already in pain. Also, what do you think about working with usnea oil topically for non-dental pain? Usnea oil topically for non-dental pain is a thing for sure, depending on the type of pain. If it's right on the surface, like an abrasion or something, it will often help quite a bit. If it's something like joint pain that's further in, it doesn't seem to help as much to use it topically, although you can take it internally for pain as well. I usually have people take 2 teaspoons of it. If you take more than a few teaspoons of oil, it can sort of be hard for people to digest, but 2 teaspoons is usually pretty agreeable and sufficient dosage wise. And I use that a lot for people who are needing pain management, but not wanting anything that's going to make them drowsy or feel out of it or anything like that. And it's pretty helpful. Often use it as a part of a overall strategy for helping people to cease use of prescription pain medicine, because they still need pain management, and if they have effective pain management, they're much less likely to feel like they have to use opioids. So sometimes usnea is helpful for that. Yes, I think that the classes that I do are all going to be recorded. Yeah, I have gotten some better equipment and stuff like that, lighting and microphones and stuff like that for the new classroom here. So I'm excited to record some videos, and that will probably include those classes among other things.
Will you still be doing a weekend intensive or?
Yeah, I'm going to do that in April. I'm not sure which weekend, but I'm going to do that in April, and that's going to have, you know, a few workshops and on 2 days, on a Saturday and a Sunday, and hopefully as many of you as can will make it to those, and those workshops will also be recorded and posted on this on the Hedge School YouTube channel. The clinics classes will probably be posted on the Clinical Herbalist YouTube channel, and this will be just, you know, for people who are in the Hedge School classes rather than the general public. So it'll be on the Hedge School channel. And if you haven't already, if you've got plant collections to show me, I would love for you to make some time to look at those with me, either in person or via Zoom. All right. Any other questions for today? All right. Well, thanks for coming, and I will talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you.